2025 has the potential to be the greatest Formula One season of all time. At least I hope so. As of today, it has only been a few days since the end of Formula One testing in Bahrain, and we are less than 2 weeks away from the start of the Formula One season in Australia. The hype around this Formula One season is beyond anything I've seen since the regulations changed back in 2022. When the ground effect was introduced in 22, we were all hoping for a big title fight between McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes. And while we did get a half-season title fight between Ferrari and Red Bull, Leclerc and Ferrari fell off in the second half of the season, and that really enabled just Red Bull to dominate for the next couple years. However, during 2024, while Red Bull did dominate the first 5 out of 6 races, they started to fall off drastically, and that enabled Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari to all be able to come up and win races. And that really meant that at the end of 2024, you couldn't tell who was going to win each race. You didn't know what teams were going to be strong at what tracks, and what drivers would do well. And while there was talk of a title fight between Lando and Verstappen, it was pretty evident by the end of the year that Red Bull was still going to take the championship. However, with all teams being so closely matched, this sets us up perfect for a great 2025 season. At least I hope so. Now, in today's video, I will be giving you 3 reasons why I think Formula One's 2025 season could be the greatest Formula One season of all time. I'm just praying. I really hope I'm not wrong. The number one reason to get excited for the 2025 Formula One season is the pure amount of competition on the grid. As I said before, off the end of last year, you really couldn't tell who was going to win each race. You didn't know what teams were going to be strong at what tracks, and what drivers were going to do well. And so far, looking at testing, that seems to be the case again this year. I started watching Formula One back in 2015, and for the majority of that time, Formula One was mostly dominated by 2 teams, Red Bull and Mercedes. However, looking at the 2025 testing, it looks like we could have McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes all fighting for one title, and we could start to break that streak of just one team winning for 3 years or 4 years in a row. While it has only been a few days since testing, the general perception around the paddock is that McLaren are the favorites going into this season. McLaren's long-run pace looks really quite strong, but I'm hoping that Mercedes and Ferrari aren't too far behind. And given the success that Max Verstappen and Red Bull have had in this ground effect era, it would be naive to count them out. As we have seen in Formula One's past, the jump in between seasons that teams can make gets smaller and smaller as we get closer to the end of a regulation cycle. Teams' understanding of the current regulations gets so high that there isn't really a difference between all the top cars. We saw this at the end of 21 when we had Lewis and Verstappen and Red Bull and Mercedes were so close together, and we are hoping that this can happen at the end of this regulation cycle. Looking at testing so far, it's looking pretty good. And with this being the last year of the current ground effect regulations, it is shaping up to be a great 2025 season. This year, I'm hoping that we will have a title fight that goes down to the very last race, something like 2010 where we had Webber, Vettel, Lewis, and Alonso all fighting for the championship in the last race. At least I'm hoping. However, while I have very high hopes for this season, and so does a lot of the F1 community, we must admit that we could have a situation where one team or one driver just runs away with the championship. Sometimes at the end of a regulation cycle, you'll have teams pushing their R&D as far into the season as they can so they can fight for the championship, say like 2021 with Red Bull and Mercedes, or we might get a situation like 2013, where one team runs away with the championship after all the other teams give up and focus on the next regulation change. Hopefully that doesn't happen this year, and we really do have a title fight that goes down to the last race, but guess we'll just have to wait and see. Nevertheless, let's talk about reason number 2. My second reason to get excited for the 2025 Formula One season is the grid, and specifically the rookies. Going into the 2024 season, it was the first year in Formula One history where not a single team had changed their lineup. However, going into this year, Formula One has had its biggest grid shakeup in years. Every single team except for 2 has changed their driver lineup for 2025, which should make for an entertaining and unpredictable season. The 2025 season will have a grand total of 6 rookie drivers, except there are some drivers like Liam Lawson and Ollie Behrman that have had a few races under their belt. So I'm just going to do a quick review on the 2026 rookies and give my thoughts and predictions on how well I think they will do this season. The first of those rookies is 18-year-old Kimi Antonelli, who has replaced Lewis Hamilton for the 2025 season. Mercedes haven't really gone through the traditional route of throwing their drivers in Williams for a few years and then eventually bring them up to Mercedes. With Kimi, they've kind of fast-tracked him to Mercedes, hoping that other teams won't pick him up. Apparently, he's done 9,000 kilometers in older Formula One cars to prepare for this 2025 season. So, I think he should do pretty well. Toto Wolff is very confident he could be the next Max Verstappen level talent, but we'll just have to wait and see. Next, we have Ollie Behrman, who had a really strong debut with Ferrari in Saudi Arabia last year. He also got an early jump to Haas at the end of last year when he got to replace Magnussen for 2 races. I was really quite impressed with his Ferrari debut last year, and he honestly just seems like a really nice guy, so I think he's a talent to look out for. I honestly wouldn't even be surprised if he pushed Ocon a lot next year, and even potentially could beat him by the end of the season, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. Next, we have Liam Lawson, who is, while still technically a rookie, he has raced in 11 races in Formula 1 when he replaced Ricciardo in 23 and then replaced him at the end of the year in 24. From what we've seen so far with Lawson in the past few years, I think he could do really great things in the Red Bull car, but I just am not quite sure this was the greatest year for him to join the team. Looking at testing so far, it looks like Red Bull are still kind of struggling with the balance issues they had at the end of last season, and right now Verstappen and Red Bull are saying that they're probably not looking too good going into this season, but yet again, they say that every season. Red Bull may not be able to give him the car he wants this year, but additionally, Verstappen is unquestionably the number one at that team, so either way, he might have to play second fiddle. Nevertheless, I think he can still do great things at Red Bull, and, do a lot better than Perez did last year. So, now, Jack Doohan. We've all heard the rumors. Franco Colapinto is practically biting at his heels, and we don't even know if he could see out the season. There's a lot of pressure on him to perform and perform quickly. I still think he can, though. He had a really solid junior career, and I think he could throw some surprises our way. Nevertheless, if he doesn't push Gasly all the way this season, I don't know if it'll be enough for him to keep the seat, but we'll see. Next is the Red Bull junior Isaac Hadjar. Isaac is a relatively new addition to the Red Bull driving pool, and he was only picked up a few years ago when he was still in Formula 3. He narrowly missed out on the Formula 2 title last year, and while it did take him a few years to get going there, Red Bull are pretty confident that he can bring results. Only a few more days till we find out, but I think that he could be the next victim of the whole Red Bull musical chairs that they've done with their drivers the past few years. And I just really hope that Red Bull give him the time to get up to speed and get used to the car rather than just throwing him out the window early like they've done with the past drivers. Last but not least, we have last year's Formula 2 world champion, Gabriel Bortoleto. I think Bortoleto will be one of the more popular rookies of 2025, as everyone just loves having a Brazilian back in the sport. He is a former McLaren young driver, but has just been let go so he can join Sauber for the 2025 season. However, while I think he is capable of really great things, I don't think that Sauber is. It's kind of a truck. I think it could be a very painful first year for Bortoleto, but he's just got to get through the Sauber years and eventually he'll move up the grid. So those are the 6 rookies for the 2025 season. I feel like in this modern era of Formula 1, young drivers have been really undervalued in the sport. So it's nice to see that a lot of teams are actually bringing young talent into the grid. I feel like the likes of Verstappen and Leclerc have inspired a lot of those teams that they should invest more time and money into their young driver programs. So, as time moves on, we'll see a lot more younger drivers on the grid. And with a lot more inexperience on the grid, it should make for an entertaining and unpredictable season with them all kind of getting used to the new cars. But we'll see. It'll be a good one. A little bit of a longer segment there, but now I'm going to move on to my third and final reason about why you should be excited for the 2025 Formula 1 season. My final reason to get excited for the season is the stories. I think one of the greatest things about Formula 1 is the stories that you hear up and down the grid and just in the Formula 1 community. This could be about on-track stuff, racing, and rivalries that is going on between teams or drivers, like Verstappen and Lando or Sebastian and Hamilton. This could also be about things off the track, like tensions between teams and team principals, like we saw with Toto Wolff and Christian Horner a few years ago, or just other stories that are surrounding the paddock and the world of Formula 1. And while a lot of these stories shape themselves as the season goes on and more things start to unfold, there are still a lot of stories we can talk about as we go into this 2025 season. One of the stories we can talk about is Verstappen and whether or not Red Bull can bring him the car he needs to get his 5th title. At the end of last year, Red Bull was easily not the greatest car on the grid, and yet even with that, Verstappen got the occasional win and some podiums to become the 4-time world champion that he is. I think it's going to be really interesting to see if Red Bull can give him the car that he needs to become a 5-time world champion, and yet even if they can't, it'll be fantastic to see if Verstappen can pick up any scraps and get the results that he needs to get this 5th world title. Another story that I think could be really exciting is the team rivalry at McLaren. We know that Lando Norris is the favorite going into the 2025 season, with McLaren looking very, very strong in testing. However, there were a few races last year where Piastri was definitely at Lando's pace or sometimes even beyond it, and I think it's just bound he's going to get better. And with McLaren really sticking to the papaya rules, I think it could be a really interesting dynamic between the two drivers, especially if one of them is fighting for a title. Another story is Carlos Sainz moving to Williams. I think since his time at Red Bull, Alex Albon hasn't really had a chance to go up against a really talented teammate. Carlos Sainz already looks really quick in that car, so either Williams are going to have some intra-team battles or they're just going to move up the grid this year, maybe even be 5th fastest. James Vowell's doing amazing things to that team, so we'll see. Last but not least, this is probably the most exciting story in Formula 1 in years, is Lewis Hamilton moving to Ferrari.
I really cannot wait to see whether Lewis will live up to expectations at Ferrari. Even though a lot of people were saying he was washed and, Mercedes were done with him by the end of last year, I think Lewis will really have the motivation to perform and do great things at Ferrari. We've already seen this though. The team and the fans love him, and going up against Charles Leclerc, who has been there for many, many years at this point, will be a really, really interesting story. At this point, between them, I really couldn't tell you who would win. Leclerc have made that team his, but Lewis has really absorbed into that team quite well, and so far really likes the way that the car drives. Ferrari are looking pretty quick in testing. McLaren definitely look a step ahead, but I think they're probably on level with Mercedes. So with some good R&D, I think Ferrari can really challenge for the title. However, just like McLaren, this could be a really interesting dynamic if they are close in points by the end of the season. Either way, whatever happens, I cannot wait to see what Lewis does at Ferrari. If Lewis Hamilton wins his 8th world title in red, that will be one of the greatest stories in Formula One's history. And all of sporting history, to be honest. Anyways, there's plenty more stories up and down the grid. You got the rookies, you got Kimi Antonelli at Mercedes. There's plenty more things to talk about, but I'm going to end it there. I am beyond excited for this season. I have not been this excited for a Formula One season since probably 2022. I was really hoping for a big championship fight that year, but now since the grid is really condensed together and all the top teams are competitive, I think we could have the greatest Formula One season ever. This has been me, Eamon Ryan from Pure Racing. I have a website up now with articles on pureracing.org. You can check it out. I will have new content up on there soon, more articles, photos, etc., and of course new videos on this channel. Thank you for watching. Catch you later.